They said the mission never existed. They said the medic died in the blast. And they said the dog was just following training. But in the middle of a rain-soaked harbor hospital, a wounded Navy SEAL watched his combat K9 break every rule it had ever learned. The dog didn't bark, it didn't attack, it sat down, straightened its back, and saluted a quiet EMT standing in the shadows. The man on the stretcher felt his anger collapse into disbelief, because he knew that face. He buried that name 3 years ago. What if the military erased the truth, but a dog remembered it? What if survival itself was the miracle? This is a story about loyalty that outlives orders, about faith that survives silence, and about the kind of miracles God performs when no one is watching. Rain fell hard over the harbor of Savannah, slanting sideways under the pull of coastal wind, drumming against steel containers and slick concrete, like a warning that refused to soften. Sodium lights along the docks bled into the wet ground, their reflections stretched and broken, turning the night into a mosaic of gold and shadow. The city did not sleep here. It watched. Michael Carter was strapped to a gurney as it rolled through the emergency entrance of the Coastal Trauma Center, water still dripping from the hem of his clothing onto the polished floor. He was 41, tall and broad even while lying flat, his body shaped by decades of discipline rather than comfort. His dark brown hair was cut short in regulation fashion, now matted with rain and streaked with blood. His face was drawn tight, jaw clenched, not from panic, but from the practiced control of a man who had learned long ago that pain was information, not an enemy. Blood soaked through the gauze pressed against his right side, dark and steady, each pulse a quiet reminder of how close the margin had become. He was losing more than he could afford. He knew it by the heaviness creeping into his limbs, by the distant ringing in his ears that came and went like a tide pulling back too slowly. Still, his eyes remained open, alert, scanning lights, movement, exits. Awareness had been trained into him deeper than fear. Beside the gurney walked Atlas. Atlas was an 8-year-old German shepherd, large-framed and powerfully built, his black and tan coat darkened by rain until it gleamed under the hospital lights. His muzzle showed the faint gray of age, not weakness, but long service. A thin scar traced the fur along his shoulder, half hidden unless the light caught it just right. His amber eyes missed nothing. They moved constantly, tracking hands, feet, sudden shifts in posture. His ears flicked at every raised voice, every metallic clatter of equipment. Michael's left hand was locked around Atlas's collar. It was not a conscious decision. Even now, with his strength bleeding away, his fingers held fast, knuckles white beneath the glove. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, from nights when Atlas had been the only constant in places where nothing else held. As long as his hand stayed there, the world made sense. The EMTs moved quickly but carefully, adjusting straps, checking vitals, calling out numbers. They were professionals, competent, efficient, but Atlas did not respond to credentials. When one of them stepped in too fast, reaching toward Michael's chest, Atlas's body shifted instantly. His muscles tightened. A low growl rolled out of his chest, deep and controlled, not a threat yet, but a line clearly drawn. "Easy," Michael said, his voice rough but steady. The word carried weight. It always had. Atlas's growl softened, but it did not disappear. He remained pressed close to the gurney, shoulder brushing metal, his stance angled slightly outward, positioning himself between Michael and the rest of the room. He was not afraid. He was ready. The EMT nearest him hesitated, instinct overriding training. He was young, lean, rain still clinging to his jacket. He had worked around police dogs before, had been warned about K9 protocols. But this was different. This dog was not part of the scene. He was the scene. "We need to get him inside now," another EMT said, quieter this time, eyes flicking to Atlas and then away. Michael's breathing stayed controlled, shallow but deliberate. He shifted his gaze toward the voice, measured it, then spoke. "He stays with me." It was not loud. It did not need to be. No one argued. Inside the trauma bay, the air changed. The sharp scent of antiseptic replaced salt and diesel. Fluorescent lights pressed down, unforgiving, exposing every stain, every drop of blood that had followed him in from the harbor. The city's noise dulled here, replaced by the controlled chaos of medicine, beeping monitors, rolling carts, clipped commands. Atlas's attention sharpened. Every movement drew his focus. A tray clattered. His ears snapped toward it. A voice rose too quickly. His growl returned, deeper now. When a nurse leaned in too close to adjust the bandage at Michael's side, Atlas's lips pulled back slightly, teeth just visible, his body rigid with warning. Michael tightened his grip on the collar. Pain flared through his abdomen as he shifted, but he did not release. "He's working," he said through clenched teeth. "Slow down." The nurse froze, then adjusted her movements, hands deliberately slower, calmer. It was not written in any manual, but everyone in the room felt it. The invisible boundary Atlas had set. Even seasoned medics found themselves moving more carefully without fully understanding why. Michael stared up at the ceiling, forcing his vision to stay clear. He did not allow himself to close his eyes. Closing them felt too much like giving ground. His pulse thudded unevenly in his ears, each beat a reminder that time was narrowing. Still, his hand did not leave the collar. Atlas leaned slightly into the pressure of Michael's grip, grounding himself against it. The dog's breathing was steady, controlled, mirroring the man he guarded. Whatever pain Michael carried, Atlas carried it with him, silently, without question. To Atlas, the world had reduced itself to one truth: protect the handler. To Michael, Atlas was more than a dog. He was structure, order, proof that something in his life still responded exactly as it was meant to. Rain continued to strike the glass beyond the trauma bay doors, relentless and cold. Somewhere outside, the harbor shifted and groaned, indifferent to blood and bone and human endurance. Inside, a wounded Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd held their ground together, as they always had, against a world that felt suddenly, dangerously close. The trauma bay moved around Michael Carter in practiced urgency, hands adjusting lines, voices calling numbers, wheels locking the gurney into place. He registered it all without focusing on any single detail, his awareness spread wide, thin, and deliberate. Atlas remained pressed to his side, rigid but contained, his presence a constant pressure against Michael's fading strength. For a few seconds, it almost felt stable. Then Atlas changed. It began with stillness. Atlas stopped breathing the way he had been, the steady rise and fall that mirrored Michael's own controlled rhythm. His body froze, muscles locking beneath his coat as if a switch had been thrown. His head lifted slowly, not in alarm, but in concentration. His nose angled upward, drawing in air that carried nothing any human in the room noticed. His ears rose, stiff and forward, tracking something beyond the visible movement of the trauma bay. Michael felt it through the collar before he saw it. "Atlas," he said quietly, a warning shaped by habit more than volume. The dog did not respond. A low sound rolled out of Atlas's chest, deeper than the growl he had given the medics earlier. This was not territorial. This was not fear. It was recognition colliding with uncertainty, an instinct surfacing from a place training could not fully bury. Michael tightened his grip. Pain flared hot and sharp through his side as his muscles engaged against injury, but his hand did not loosen. "Easy," he said again, forcing calm into the word. Atlas leaned forward. The collar pulled taut. A nurse noticed first. She was in her early 30s, dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, her movements efficient but cautious. Her eyes flicked from the IV line to the dog, then to Michael's hand, straining around the collar. "Sir," she said, measured, "your dog needs to stay back." Michael did not answer. His attention had narrowed to the tension humming beneath his palm, the way Atlas's entire frame vibrated like a held breath. Another step forward from the dog. "Atlas!" Michael snapped, sharper now, the command edged with authority, forged over years of obedience earned, not assumed. For a heartbeat, Atlas hesitated. Training fought instinct. Michael could feel it in the micro-shift of the dog's weight, the fraction of a second where discipline nearly won. Then the instinct surged. Atlas lunged. The force of it tore the collar free from Michael's weakening grasp, the sudden pull jerking the gurney sideways until its wheels screeched and locked. Michael shouted as pain exploded through his abdomen, a raw sound dragged out of him before he could stop it. "Atlas, get back here!" The shout echoed across the bay, sharp enough to cut through the controlled chaos. Atlas did not look back. He hit the floor running, claws scraping briefly against polished tile before he found traction. His movement was clean, efficient, driven by purpose rather than panic. A security guard stepped into his path on instinct, a broad man in his 50s with a shaved head and the heavy build of someone who had once relied on strength more than speed. Atlas veered around him without breaking stride, teeth flashing in a silent warning as he passed. "Dog loose!" someone yelled. Michael strained against the straps, chest heaving as he tried to sit up. The pain nearly blacked his vision, but anger kept him anchored. "That's my dog!" he barked, voice hoarse but commanding. "Do not touch him." Hands pressed him back down. A male EMT leaned over him, mid-30s, stocky, with tired eyes that had seen too many nights like this. "Sir, you're bleeding out," he said, firm but not unkind. "We need you still." Michael turned his head enough to see Atlas disappearing toward the open corridor that led deeper into the emergency wing. "He's not running," Michael said through clenched teeth. "He's tracking." The EMT hesitated, something in Michael's tone making him pause despite himself. Tracking what? Michael did not answer. He did not know. That was the problem. Atlas's path took him past treatment bays and equipment carts, his pace unwavering. Nurses flattened themselves instinctively against walls as he passed, startled more by his certainty than his size. A tray clattered to the floor behind him, metal skidding loudly. Atlas did not flinch. A second security guard reached for his radio, fingers hovering uncertainly. He was younger, early 40s, with close-cropped hair and the stiff posture of someone who still thought in procedures. "Do we stop him?" he asked, eyes tracking the dog's retreating form. "Negative," the older guard said, voice low. "Not unless you want stitches." Back in the trauma bay, Michael's breathing grew shallow, uneven. He felt cold now, a creeping chill that settled into his extremities. His focus fractured, slipping between Atlas's absence and the hands working to keep him alive. He hated the helplessness more than the pain. "That dog doesn't break like that," Michael said, his voice quieter now, edged with disbelief. "He doesn't disobey." The nurse with the dark bun met his gaze briefly. There was something cautious in her eyes, not fear, but calculation. "Dogs get overwhelmed," she said, carefully neutral. Michael shook his head as much as the restraints allowed. "Not him." The EMT pressed fresh gauze against his side, blood already seeping through. "Sir, listen to me," he said. "Whatever your dog's doing, we need you conscious." Michael closed his eyes for half a second, then forced them open again. Images flickered behind his lids, fragments of other corridors, other nights, Atlas moving ahead of him through smoke and debris with the same unerring purpose. Atlas had never run without reason, not once. A voice crackled over the intercom, clipped and tense. "Security to Corridor 3. Repeat, security to Corridor 3. Michael's jaw tightened. Corridor 3 led back toward the ambulance bay, toward the edge of controlled space, where outside bled in and rules loosened. His heart pounded harder, each beat jarring his injury. "What did he catch?" Michael murmured, more to himself than anyone else. No one answered. The trauma team worked faster now, responding to numbers that were trending the wrong way. A doctor stepped into view, tall, late 40s, silver threading his hair, his expression focused but strained. He took in Michael's condition in a glance. "We stabilize him first," he said, voice carrying authority without volume. "Everything else is secondary." Michael turned his head slightly toward him. "That dog doesn't make mistakes," he said again, the words rough but absolute. "If he moved, it's because something's wrong." The doctor held his gaze for a beat longer than protocol required, then nodded once. "Noted." Michael sagged back against the gurney as another wave of weakness rolled through him. The world narrowed to sound and pressure, and the echo of Atlas's nails against tile, still ringing in his head. He clenched his hands into fists, empty now, the absence of the collar a physical ache. For the first time since the explosion, fear crept in, not for himself, but for the one constant he no longer had within reach. Atlas had broken orders, and Michael did not know why. Atlas slowed as he reached the edge of the ambulance bay, the place where the hospital's order thinned into shadow and open space. The rain pressed in from outside, tapping against metal and glass, pooling beneath the vehicles parked in rigid lines. He did not bark. He did not hesitate. His movement lost all urgency and became deliberate, measured, as if guided by something older than command. Near the rear of one ambulance stood a woman in an EMT jacket, the reflective strips catching the cold yellow light overhead. She was still, almost unnaturally so, hands resting at her sides, posture straight without stiffness. She appeared to be in her late 30s, tall and lean, with a frame built for endurance rather than strength. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight, practical, severe in a way that suggested habit rather than style. Her face carried calm lines, shaped by restraint, not softness, and her eyes held a quiet focus that did not flinch when Atlas approached. She did not step back. She did not reach for him. She simply stood where she was, breathing evenly, watching. Atlas came to a stop directly in front of her. For a brief moment, nothing moved. Rain hissed against the concrete. An engine ticked as it cooled. Somewhere behind him, voices carried from the trauma bay, but they sounded distant, muffled, as if the space had narrowed to just the two of them. Then Atlas sat. The motion was precise. His hind legs folded beneath him, his spine straightened, his chest lifted. There was no slack in his posture, no uncertainty. He aligned himself perfectly, gaze fixed forward, not on the woman's face, but on an invisible point beyond her, as if answering to something remembered rather than present. Slowly, with controlled intent, Atlas raised his right paw and held it suspended in the air. A salute? The effect was immediate. Sound seemed to drain from the ambulance bay, leaving behind a hollow quiet that felt heavier than noise. A paramedic froze mid-step, fingers tightening around a stretcher handle. A security guard halted a few paces away, his instinct to intervene dissolving into confusion. No one spoke. No one moved. The woman remained still. Her expression did not change, but a subtle tightening crossed her features, something that looked less like surprise and more like recognition held in check. Her eyes flicked briefly to Atlas's raised paw, then back to his face. She did not smile. She did not speak. She did not break the silence he had created. Rain continued to fall, streaking down the sides of the ambulance, beating on Atlas's dark fur. The yellow light reflected off the wet ground, framing the dog and the woman in a stark, almost ceremonial glow. It was not a moment that belonged to the hospital or the harbor. It felt removed from both, suspended between past and present. Someone whispered, barely audible, a breath rather than a word. Atlas did not lower his paw. The woman shifted her weight slightly, just enough to show she was aware of every eye now fixed on her, But she did not retreat. Her calm was not performative. It was practiced, the kind that came from years of learning when to be invisible and when stillness was safer than motion. Seconds stretched. Finally, the woman lifted one hand, palm open, stopping short of touching him. The gesture was careful, respectful, as if acknowledging the posture without interrupting it. Atlas's breathing deepened, slow and controlled, but his salute remained unbroken. Around them, the ambulance bay held its breath. Whatever rule governed this moment was not written anywhere the watching staff could see. It was older than policy, older than procedure. It belonged to a world they were only now realizing had brushed up against their own. And in that strange, rain-soaked quiet, a working dog sat at attention before a silent EMT, and no one could explain why it felt like something sacred had just taken place. Michael Carter saw her face clearly now, not as a shape at the edge of his vision, but as a fixed point the room seemed to bend around. The surge of anger that had carried him through pain and restraint collapsed inward, breaking apart into disorientation so complete it felt physical. His breath caught, his chest tightened. For a moment, the ordered sounds of the emergency bay faded into a dull, distant hum, as if someone had turned the volume down on the world. Sarah Miller stood beneath the yellow lights near the ambulance, still and composed. She looked older than the last image he carried of her, but not weaker. 38 now, tall and slender, her frame built for endurance rather than display. The reflective EMT jacket softened the lines of her body, yet her posture remained unmistakable, shoulders squared without stiffness, weight balanced as if she were prepared to move in any direction at a moment's notice. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight in a practical knot, severe to anyone who valued style, necessary to anyone who valued function. A thin scar traced the line of her jaw, pale and clean, the kind left by speed and proximity rather than accident. Her face held no apology. It held calm. Michael knew that calm. He had followed it through smoke and confusion, through moments when shouting accomplished nothing and steadiness saved lives. She had been the kind of medic who spoke quietly and expected to be obeyed, not because of rank, but because everyone around her understood that hesitation near her was dangerous. That steadiness had been forged long before the night he lost her. It had been tempered further by what followed. "You're dead," Michael said, the words tearing free before he could shape them. His voice sounded wrong to his own ears, thin and cracked, stripped of authority by disbelief. "I watched the ceiling come down. I watched the fire swallow that corner." Sarah did not interrupt him. She let the words land. Her eyes remained on his, unflinching, steady. "You watched debris fall," she said when he finished. Her voice was low even, without the sharpness of correction. "You did not watch me die." The simplicity of the statement hit him harder than denial would have. Michael shook his head once, then again, as if motion might scatter the image. "We searched," he said. "We counted. We pulled bodies until the sun came up. Your name was on the list." "I know," Sarah replied. The admission settled heavily between them. Michael felt his pulse climb again, the monitor answering with a sharp protest. A nurse stepped closer, hands hovering near his IV, her movements cautious. She was middle-aged, her hair streaked with gray, eyes sharp with long experience. She glanced between Michael and Sarah, reading the tension without understanding its origin. "Sir," she said gently, "your vitals are spiking." Michael did not look at her. "She shouldn't be here," he said, the accusation hollow even as it left his mouth. "None of this makes sense." Sarah inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the nurse's presence without shifting her attention from Michael. "It doesn't have to," she said. "Not yet." The restraint in her manner was deliberate. She did not rush to explain. She did not deny his reality or replace it with her own. She stood as if explanation were a resource to be used carefully, not spilled to relieve discomfort. Those who worked alongside her in the hospital knew her as competent and distant, polite but reserved. Few knew that this distance had been learned the hard way, shaped by years where being seen too clearly invited consequences. Atlas stood close to the gurney, his shoulder firm against Michael's leg. The dog's posture had shifted from alert to attentive, his weight evenly distributed, his breathing slow. His eyes tracked Sarah with recognition that did not require memory. He did not growl. He did not whine. He simply remained present, a silent acknowledgement of something settled and familiar. Michael noticed. His throat tightened. "He knows you?" he said quietly. Sarah's gaze flicked to Atlas for a brief moment. Something passed through her expression then, too quick to name, a trace of regret held firmly in check. "He remembers who kept him breathing," she said. The words cut deeper than she intended. Michael swallowed hard. "SAL Team 9 is gone," he said. "They erased us. Every file burned. You were part of that." "Yes," Sarah said. "I was." The room felt smaller, as if the walls had edged closer to listen. A younger doctor hovered near the foot of the bed, tall and lean, with the focused intensity of someone still proving himself. He watched Sarah openly now, curiosity sharpening his features. Michael forced himself to breathe evenly. "Then what are you doing here?" he asked. "Why wear civilian colors and pretend this is ordinary?" Sarah did not bristle. She did not soften. "I am ordinary now," she said. "On paper." Michael let out a short to humorless laugh. "You never were." She met his gaze. "That's why I had to disappear." The admission did not come with drama. It was delivered like a fact long accepted. Michael felt anger rise again, hot and unmoored. "You let us believe you were gone," he said. "You let us carry that." Sarah's shoulders lifted with a controlled breath, then settled. "I let you survive," she replied. "Carrying grief is lighter than carrying the truth I had." The nurse shifted, uneasy. "Sir," she said again, firmer this time, "you need to stay focused." Michael nodded, the movement costing him more than it should have. "I am focused," he said, "for the first time tonight." A security supervisor approached the edge of the space, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence measured. His eyes flicked from Sarah to Atlas and back again. "Ma'am," he said, careful, "we'll need clarification." "In a moment," Sarah replied. Her tone was calm, not dismissive. The supervisor hesitated, then stepped back, yielding to something he could not articulate. Michael watched it all, cataloging details despite his weakening body. "You always did that," he said. "Make people wait." Sarah's mouth tightened slightly. Waiting kept people alive. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "Why now?" he asked. "Why show up at all?" "Because I was needed," she said, "and because I was already here." The doctor stepped closer, asserting control. "We need to proceed with treatment," he said. "This conversation can't compromise patient care." Sarah turned to him fully, her stance respectful but grounded. "I won't interfere," she said. "You already did," Michael murmured. "Yes," she agreed, "and I would again." The honesty disarmed him. Exhaustion rolled through his body, heavy and sudden. "Some missions don't end," he said, echoing her earlier words. "No," Sarah replied. "They just change uniforms?" She took a step back, deliberate, increasing distance without retreating. Her posture returned to neutral, as if she were folding herself back into the background by choice. "Rest," she said. "You're alive. That matters." Atlas shifted and lowered himself beside the gurney, a soft exhale marking his compliance. He did not look away from Sarah until she stopped moving. Michael stared at her, memorizing the lines of her face, the calm she carried like armor. The woman he had buried was standing in front of him, breathing, solid, refusing explanation. The woman who should have been dead was very much alive, and she was not ready to tell him why. The present continued to move around Michael Carter, even as his mind slipped backward, pulled by the gravity of recognition and unfinished memory. The trauma bay resumed its rhythms, quieter now, more controlled, but the space between him and Sarah Miller remained charged. He watched her with the focus of a man trying to reconcile two truths that refused to coexist: the certainty of her death and the undeniable fact of her standing there, breathing, composed. Sarah did not speak again right away. She knew the shape of questions forming in him. She had lived with them longer than he had. Instead, she stepped a few paces to the side, giving the medical staff room to work without leaving Michael's line of sight. Her movements were economical, learned under conditions where wasted motion had consequences. To the hospital staff, she looked like what she claimed to be: a competent EMT who understood when to step forward and when to disappear. To Michael, every gesture echoed with a different context. The memories came unbidden. 3 years earlier, there had been a briefing room with no windows and a map pinned to the wall that showed the Savannah port highlighted in dull red. The mission had been labeled Routine Interdiction, a joint operation meant to intercept a weapons transfer disguised as commercial cargo. SAL Team 9 had been assembled quietly, names pulled from different rosters, expertise overlapping just enough to make them effective and disposable. Michael had been assigned as point. Sarah had been attached as medical support. Sarah then had been the same height, the same lean build, but her hair had been cut shorter, her uniform crisp. She had been calm even in the briefing, asking only 2 questions, both precise. She did not speculate. She did not grandstand. The way she operated had put people at ease without them realizing why. The mission had gone wrong before it ever officially began. What the briefing had not included was the scale of the operation running through the port, or the names tied to it. Crates marked as agricultural equipment had been reinforced, shielded. Routes had been altered mid-transit, documentation scrubbed in real time. When Team 9 breached the warehouse, they found more than weapons. They found evidence, ledgers, communications, names that did not belong on any manifest. Sarah had seen them first. She had knelt beside a wounded dock worker, pretending focus, while her eyes scanned a dropped folder half hidden beneath a pallet. Michael remembered the moment she looked up at him, just briefly, her expression tightening in a way he had not understood at the time. She had shaken her head once, subtle, almost imperceptible. Then the explosion had torn the ceiling apart. Back in the present, Michael's breath hitched as the memory ended where it always did, with fire and falling concrete. He opened his eyes to find Sarah watching him, not intrusively, but with awareness sharpened by experience. "They erased us," he said quietly, more to confirm than accuse. "Didn't they?" Sarah nodded once. "There was no unit to investigate," she replied. "No paperwork to subpoena. No chain to follow." The truth unfolded in fragments, not as a confession, but as an alignment of facts Michael had carried without context. The explosion had not been an accident. The delayed response had not been coincidence. Team 9 had been declared non-operational within hours, their mission categorized as a training exercise gone wrong, their records sealed and then removed. Families were given silence dressed up as security. Sarah had survived because she had been thrown clear, shielded by a collapsing support beam that broke the force of the blast. She had crawled out with cracked ribs and a concussion, dragging 2 others with her before the secondary collapse sealed the rest inside. By the time reinforcements arrived, the narrative had already been written. She knew too much. The ledgers she had seen were real. The routes were protected. The names connected the port to a weapons pipeline that ran far beyond Savannah. Making noise would not have exposed the operation. it would have buried her with it. "They told me I could vanish quietly," Sarah said, her voice even, "or I could insist on being heard." Michael closed his eyes briefly. He knew the answer before she finished. "I chose quiet," she said. "Quiet keeps people breathing." Her disappearance had been surgical. No debrief, no extraction, no flag-draped ceremony. One moment she existed in the system. The next, she did not. Her death had been convenient, final, unquestioned. She had taken the EMT job under her own name, not because it was safe, but because it was invisible. Emergency medical work gave her proximity to crisis without command, purpose without attention. She could save lives without filing reports that traveled upward. The uniform was different, but the work was familiar. Stabilize, prioritize, move on. Michael studied her now with new clarity. The reserve in her manner was no longer just discipline. It was habit reinforced by years of choosing not to be noticed. Her calm with patience was genuine, but it was also controlled. She did not invite questions. She answered what was asked, and nothing more. People remembered her as competent, not memorable. That was by design. A new voice entered the space, cautious but firm. The hospital administrator was a woman in her early 50s, sharply dressed despite the late hour, hair cut in a precise bob that framed a face accustomed to authority. Her name was Elaine Porter. She had the posture of someone who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around her. She took in the scene quickly, eyes moving from Michael to Sarah to Atlas, calculating. "Who's in charge here?" she asked. The attending physician stepped forward, measured. "I am." Elaine's gaze settled on Sarah. "And you are?" "Working," Sarah replied simply. Elaine frowned slightly, unused to answers that did not elaborate. "We've had reports of a disturbance involving a military animal." Michael laughed once, dry. "He's not disturbed," he said. "He recognized something you don't have clearance for." Elaine's lips tightened. "Sir, with respect?" "With none," Michael interrupted, the effort costing him but the resolve intact. "This woman saved lives tonight, mine included." Sarah did not react. She did not step in to defend herself. She never had. Elaine hesitated, then nodded once, filing the exchange away. "We'll revisit this," she said. "Later." She turned and left, heels clicking with restrained irritation. Silence settled again, different this time. Not shocked. Waited. Michael looked back at Sarah. "You kept working," he said. "All this time?" "Yes," she replied. "People don't stop getting hurt because records disappear." Atlas shifted beside the gurney, resting his head against the frame. His eyes remained on Sarah, steady and trusting. He had not forgotten the hands that had once kept him alive when no veterinarian had been available, and time had been measured in breaths. Michael felt the pieces align into something that made sense, even if it hurt. The unit had never existed because acknowledging it would have exposed the truth Sarah had seen. She had survived because disappearing had been the only way to keep that truth from killing her. "You chose silence," he said. She met his gaze. "I chose survival," she corrected, "and I chose to keep doing the work." Michael nodded slowly. The anger he had carried began to loosen its grip, replaced by something heavier but steadier. Respect. Around them, the hospital resumed its pace. Orders were given. Wheels turned. Lives continued. The truth did not announce itself. It simply remained. Sarah waited until the room had settled into a workable rhythm. She did not rush. She had learned long ago that haste drew attention, and attention complicated outcomes. When the immediate surge of activity eased and the space around Michael's gurney widened by instinct rather than instruction, she moved. She knelt beside Atlas. The floor was cold through the fabric of her pants, but she did not shift her weight or brace a hand for comfort. Her posture was balanced, economical, the way people knelt when they expected to rise quickly if needed. Up close, Atlas filled the space with quiet mass, his shoulders broad, his breathing steady. He turned his head slightly as Sarah approached, ears flicking once, then settled again. There was no tension in him now, no warning, no assessment. Trust had already been decided. Sarah placed her hands on him without gloves. Her fingers were steady, nails short, skin marked by faint scars that spoke of work done close and fast. She did not pat or soothe. She palpated, precise and deliberate, moving from shoulder to flank, following lines of muscle and bone as if reading a familiar map. Atlas did not flinch. He leaned into the contact, shifting his weight subtly to give her better access. Michael watched from the gurney, his breath slowing despite the pain still threading through his side. He had seen medics work on Atlas before, vets, handlers, specialists with equipment and protocols. None of them touched the dog like this. Sarah's hands moved with a confidence that bypassed procedure and went straight to assessment, the kind born of necessity rather than training manuals. "He took shrapnel," she said quietly, more observation than explanation. Her voice was low, pitched to avoid drawing the room back toward them. "Old injury. He compensates well." Michael swallowed. "He never lets anyone do that," he said. Sarah did not look up. "He lets people he knows." Her fingers found the edge of a healed scar beneath Atlas's fur. She pressed gently, watching the dog's eyes, his breathing, the set of his jaw. Atlas exhaled, a soft huff, and rested his chin briefly against her forearm. The gesture was unconscious, muscle memory surfacing without permission. Michael's chest tightened. The image slammed into him without warning. A different floor. Dust and smoke thick enough to taste. Atlas lying on his side, blood dark against fur. Michael himself pinned, disoriented, the world reduced to noise and weight and the certainty that he could not move. He remembered shouting, remembered nothing happening, remembered thinking the dog was gone. Then Sarah. She had appeared through the haze, her face set, movements sharp and controlled. She had dropped to the ground beside Atlas without hesitation, hands already working. No kit, no backup, just pressure, alignment, voice low and steady in Atlas's ear while the building continued to come apart around them. Michael's pulse jumped. "You?" he said hoarsely. "You were the one." Sarah paused, just briefly, her hand stilling for a fraction of a second before resuming. "I was closest," she replied. "That's not what I mean," Michael said. The realization settled into him with crushing clarity. "I was out. I couldn't give orders." Sarah's mouth tightened slightly. "You didn't need to." Atlas shifted closer to her knee, his body warm and solid, the contact grounding. She checked the line of his leg, fingers tracing where scar tissue met muscle. "He listened," she said. "He trusted." Michael stared at the ceiling for a long moment, then forced his gaze back to the two of them. "I thought I lost him," he said. "I thought that was it." Sarah nodded once. So did he. She finished the assessment without ceremony, withdrawing her hand slowly, deliberately, giving Atlas time to adjust. He followed her movement with his eyes, then settled again, satisfied. Only then did she sit back on her heels, posture composed. A young resident hovered nearby, unable to mask his curiosity. He was in his late 20s, thin, with dark hair that refused to stay neatly combed, his scrubs wrinkled from long hours. His eyes flicked between Sarah and Atlas, then to Michael. "You didn't use any equipment," he said, not accusatory, genuinely puzzled. Sarah looked at him calmly. "I didn't need to." The resident hesitated, then nodded, accepting the answer without understanding it. He stepped back, giving space he had not been told to give. Michael's voice was quieter now. "You saved him," he said. "That night." Sarah met his gaze. "He was injured," she replied. "I treated him." "That's not the same thing," Michael said. Her eyes held his, steady and unyielding. "It is to me." Atlas lifted his head and looked at Michael then, ears forward, eyes bright and clear. He did not move away from Sarah. He did not choose between them. He existed in the space they shared, as if that space had always been his. Michael felt something in him loosen, something knotted tight since the night the unit had been erased. The dog had not just survived. He had remembered. He had carried the imprint of that moment forward through years and handlers and silence, waiting for recognition without knowing he was waiting. "That's why," Michael said slowly. "That's why he ran." Sarah nodded. "He recognized the absence before you did." Michael let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest for years. He broke orders. Sarah's expression softened just a fraction. "No," she said. "He followed the right one." Around them, the trauma bay continued its quiet work. A nurse adjusted a monitor. A cart rolled past. Life went on with indifferent persistence. But the center of gravity in the room had shifted, pulled toward the space where a woman knelt beside a working dog and a wounded man watched his past come into focus. Sarah rose smoothly to her feet. She did not linger. Lingering invited questions. "He's stable," she said to no one in particular. "Watch the leg if he favors it." Michael nodded. "I will." She stepped back, re-establishing distance, but Atlas tracked her movement until she stopped. Only then did he settle fully beside the gurney, his body aligned with Michael's, as if returning to formation. Michael closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "You didn't tell anyone," he said. "About him, about what you did." Sarah shook her head. "There was no reason to." "There was to me," Michael replied. She held his gaze. "You were alive," she said. That was enough. The simplicity of it left him without argument. He watched her step away, folding herself back into the role she wore so convincingly. EMT background, necessary but unnoticed. But he knew now. Atlas knew. And the past, long buried, had found its way back through memory, muscle, and instinct, refusing to stay silent any longer. The shift in the room came quietly, without announcement. It began as a pressure at the edges of awareness, the sense Michael Carter had learned to trust long before he ever wore a uniform. Conversations lowered, movement slowed by a fraction. Atlas lifted his head from beside the gurney, ears angling toward the corridor as if he had heard a sound no one else registered yet. Then they appeared. Two men stepped into the trauma bay wearing plain clothes that fit too well to be casual. Neither carried visible badges, but both moved with the confidence of people accustomed to being obeyed. The first was tall and spare, mid-40s, dark hair cut short with gray at the temples, his face composed into something neutral that suggested practiced patience. The second was broader, early 50s, shoulders squared beneath a jacket that concealed rather than displayed strength. His eyes were pale and watchful, missing nothing. They did not look at Michael at first. Their attention went straight to Sarah. The taller man spoke, his voice calm and even, as if addressing a colleague rather than a target. "Ms. Miller," he said, "we need a word." Sarah did not stiffen. She did not step back. She turned to face them fully, posture aligned, expression unreadable. Up close, the difference between her and the hospital staff was subtle but unmistakable. She stood like someone who had been trained to absorb attention without reacting to it, her stillness deliberate rather than uncertain. "I'm working," she replied. "It won't take long," the broader man said. His tone carried the faint edge of assumption. "We just need to clarify a few things." Michael felt Atlas tense beside him, muscle tightening beneath fur. The dog rose to his feet, placing himself between Sarah and the newcomers without a sound. His body language was not aggressive, but it was absolute, a barrier drawn by instinct rather than instruction. The taller man paused, eyes flicking to Atlas, then back to Sarah. "That animal needs to be restrained." "No," Michael said. The word cut through the space sharper than his injury allowed. He pushed himself up against the restraints, pain flaring hot and immediate, but he did not stop. "He stays where he is." The broader man turned toward him for the first time. His gaze took in the IV lines, the blood-stained gauze, the tension in Michael's face. "Sir," he said, measured, "this doesn't concern you." Michael laughed once, the sound rough. "You're standing in my hospital room," he said, "talking to my medic. It concerns me." Sarah glanced back at Michael just briefly. There was no plea in her eyes, only acknowledgement. The taller man folded his hands loosely in front of him. "Ms. Miller," he said again, ignoring Michael, "you've been operating under civilian cover for some time. There are questions that need answers." Sarah's jaw tightened a fraction. "Then ask them," she said. "Here." The broader man shook his head. "That won't be necessary." Michael's pulse spiked, the monitor answering with a sharp, insistent rhythm. He felt the room tilt, felt the familiar edge of dizziness creep in. He ignored it. "She's not going anywhere," he said. "Not like this." A nurse stepped closer, concern etched into her features. She was small, early 30s, dark curls escaping her cap, hands hovering uncertainly. "Sir, you need to lie back," she urged. "Your vitals." "I'm fine," Michael snapped automatically, then winced as pain answered the lie. The taller man sighed softly, patience thinning. "Captain Carter," he said, using the rank deliberately, "this is not a negotiation." Michael froze. The use of his rank landed heavier than any threat. He turned his head slowly, eyes locking onto the man's face. "You don't get to use that," he said quietly. "Not after you erased it." Silence rippled outward from the gurney. Sarah straightened slightly, the movement subtle but unmistakable. "He's injured," she said. "If you have business with me, it can wait." "It can't," the broader man replied. "You know too much." Michael's breath came shallow and fast. "She saved my life," he said. "And his." He nodded toward Atlas, who remained planted, unmoving. "That dog is alive because of her. If you want evidence, there it is." The taller man studied Atlas with new interest. "Dogs aren't evidence." Michael's smile was thin and humorless. "This one is." A murmur moved through the staff gathered at a cautious distance. A resident whispered to another. A security guard shifted his weight, uncertain. The attending physician, a man with silvered hair and steady eyes, stepped forward at last. "This is a medical environment," he said firmly. "You will not disrupt care." The broader man glanced at him, irritation flashing briefly before being smoothed away. "We're authorized." The physician held his ground. "Not here." Sarah watched the exchange without expression. Years ago, this would have unnerved her. Now it simply confirmed what she already knew. Power did not like witnesses. Michael tightened his grip on the bed rail, forcing himself upright another inch. The pain was blinding, but anger carried him through it. "You buried the truth," he said. "You buried my unit. You don't get to bury her, too." The taller man's eyes narrowed. "You're not thinking clearly." "I've never been clearer," Michael shot back. "You want her gone because she didn't die when you needed her to." The broader man stepped forward, impatience breaking through restraint. Atlas growled, low and resonant, the sound vibrating through the room like a warning bell. The man stopped short, reassessing. Sarah finally spoke again, her voice calm, but edged now. "If you take me," she said, "you do it in front of witnesses, doctors, nurses, security. You do it knowing you won't be able to pretend I vanished." The taller man hesitated. He glanced around the bay, at the gathered eyes, the phones already half raised by instinct. He weighed outcomes. Michael seized the moment. "You already lost control," he said. "That dog saluted her. You think people won't ask why?" The broader man's jaw tightened. "This isn't over." "No," Michael agreed. "It isn't." A long beat passed. Then the taller man inclined his head slightly toward Sarah. "We'll speak later," he said. It was not a promise. It was a warning. Sarah nodded once. "I'll be here." The men turned and walked out, their departure controlled but quick, dignity dented. The pressure in the room eased, replaced by a low hum of disbelief and speculation. Michael sagged back against the gurney, exhaustion crashing over him. His vision blurred at the edges. Sarah moved instantly, placing a steady hand against his shoulder, grounding without fuss. "Easy," she said. "You did enough." He looked up at her, breathing uneven. "You're not disappearing again," he said. She met his gaze. "I'm not running," she replied. Atlas stepped closer, pressing his body against Michael's leg, solid and warm. The attending physician cleared his throat. "We continue treatment," he said. "Now." As the room returned to motion, something fundamental had shifted. The truth, once buried under paperwork and silence, had found a voice through pain, loyalty, and a dog who refused to forget. And it was no longer possible to keep it contained. The night loosened its grip by degrees rather than surrender, and the hospital felt the change before the harbor did. Conversations softened, movements slowed. The urgency that had carried Michael Carter through pain and confrontation ebbed into something steadier, manageable. He lay propped slightly higher now, color returning to his face, breathing more even. The worst had passed. The rest would take time. Sarah Miller stood near the edge of the trauma bay, hands loosely clasped, posture neutral. She had learned where to stand so she could see without being seen, help without becoming the story. The staff moved around her differently now, not cautiously, respectfully. Nurses met her eyes and nodded. A resident deferred without realizing why. Even security, once rigid with procedure, softened at the edges, unsure where authority truly rested anymore. The hospital administrator returned just before dawn, her steps quieter than before. Elaine Porter looked tired, her sharp lines softened by the hour and by calculations that no longer favored silence. She spoke with the attending physician in low tones, glanced toward Michael, then toward Sarah. Decisions had been made elsewhere, calls placed to offices that preferred not to be called. The outcome arrived without ceremony. "There will be no further interference," Elaine said at last, addressing the room as much as Sarah. "This matter is closed." Sarah inclined her head, acknowledgment without gratitude. She had never needed permission to keep breathing. Michael exhaled slowly, relief threading through the exhaustion. "They won't come back," he said, more statement than question. "Not today," Sarah replied, and not loudly. That was enough. The paperwork moved faster than Michael expected once the resistance dissolved. A military liaison arrived mid-morning, crisp uniform replacing the ambiguity of plain clothes. He was a compact man in his early 40s, clean-shaven, eyes alert but not hostile. He spoke to Michael privately, his tone careful, respectful. Words like service and acknowledgement surfaced. So did closure. Michael listened without interruption. When the liaison finished, he nodded once. "I'm done," he said. "On my terms." The liaison accepted it without argument. By afternoon, the decision was formal. Michael Carter would be medically retired with full honors. No ceremony, no speeches, just a quiet recognition that he had carried his share, and then some. He felt lighter for it, not diminished. The war he had been fighting had ended the moment he stopped trying to explain himself to people who had already decided not to listen. Atlas remained at his side throughout, content now, his body relaxed for the first time since the explosion. The leg Sarah had checked favored him slightly, but the strength was there. He rested his chin on the bed rail, eyes half-lidded, waking only when Sarah moved within view. Sarah gathered her things near the end of the shift. Not much. A jacket, a bag worn soft by use. She moved through the space with the same quiet efficiency she always had, but something in her had changed. The weight of vigilance eased, replaced by a steadier presence. She was still reserved, still careful, but the need to disappear had loosened its hold. "You're cleared," the attending physician told her, his voice warm. "Officially." Sarah nodded. "Thank you." "You could stay," he added, then hesitated. "We'd like you to." "I know," she said. "I will." Not as someone hiding, as someone choosing. Michael watched her from the bed, his eyes clearer now. "You don't have to vanish," he said. She met his gaze. "I won't." The words settled between them, simple and final. Discharge came sooner than expected. Michael stood carefully, testing his balance. The cane offered, but refused. Atlas rose with him, shoulder brushing his leg, steady and present. They moved together, slower now, but aligned. The hallway opened ahead, light gathering at the far end. Outside, the harbor waited. The sky had softened into pale blue by the time they reached the doors. The rain had thinned to mist, the air cool and clean. The docks stretched out in quiet lines, cranes silhouetted against the waking day. The city breathed, unaware of how close it had come to keeping a secret that would not stay buried. Sarah walked with them to the edge of the awning. She stopped there, hands in her jacket pockets, posture relaxed but upright. She looked smaller in the open light, not diminished, simply human. Atlas paused. He turned, sat, and straightened. The motion was exact. Back straight. Head lifted. The same discipline, the same clarity that had frozen the hospital in disbelief hours earlier. Slowly, deliberately, Atlas raised his paw and held it in the air. A final salute. Sarah did not flinch. She did not return it with gesture or word. She placed her hand over her heart just once, a quiet acknowledgment shaped by memory rather than rank. Michael watched, throat tight. "He only does that," he said, for command. Sarah met his eyes. "He does it," she replied, for those who stayed. Atlas lowered his paw and rose, stepping back to Michael's side without hesitation. The formation reasserted itself, changed, but intact. They stood there a moment longer, the three of them framed by the harbor and the morning. No cameras, no witnesses who would understand what they were seeing. That was fine. Some truths did not need applause. Sarah stepped back first, giving them space without retreating. "Take care," she said. Michael nodded. "You too?" She turned and walked back inside, her reflection briefly catching in the glass before dissolving into movement. Not disappearing, just continuing. Michael and Atlas moved forward, the city opening around them. The past did not chase them. It walked beside them, acknowledged and finally at rest. They were still here. And this time, that was enough. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not loud. They do not arrive with thunder or light from the sky. They arrive in silence, in survival, in a second chance that should not have existed. This story reminds us that God does not always remove us from the fire. Sometimes He carries us through it and lets the world believe we were lost, not because we were abandoned, but because we were being protected. Michael survived when he should not have. Sarah lived when the world said she was gone. And a dog remembered when human systems chose to forget. That is not coincidence. That is grace. In our daily lives, many of us carry unseen scars. We keep going quietly. We serve without recognition. We love without guarantees. And sometimes we feel erased, overlooked, or forgotten. But God sees what the world ignores. He remembers every act of courage done in the dark. Every life you kept moving forward when giving up felt easier. Nothing is wasted in His hands. If you are still here today, breathing, standing, loving, trying again, that itself may be the miracle. So take a moment. Thank God for the battles you survived. Pray for those still fighting theirs in silence. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. If you believe in quiet miracles and unseen grace, write Amen in the comments. Subscribe to this channel so these stories can keep reaching those who need them. And may God bless you, protect you, and keep you standing, just like those in this story. Amen.